So I've not really had a chance to do an introduction, so I'm just trying to fit it in at the front. I am getting used to YouTube and I'm only like sort of working out what I'm supposed to be doing. So you just have to bear with me while I sort my intros out because I'm not really that good at this. So I'm starting off from my brows and I'm using a powder because I feel like that works best for me. So for that reason, I'm using a MAC eyeshadow in the shade Espresso with a Royal Nickel angled brow brush. So what I'm doing here is I am creating an underline and extending my brow. So you want to keep all these stray hairs above that line, because if not, when it comes to concealing, you're going to have grey patches where you've tried to cover them sparse dark hairs. If you're lucky enough to have lighter hairs that concealer does go over, then it's not too much of a worry for you. You can just go right over them, but my hairs are really thick and pretty much black, so I have to sort of avoid this. I then create a arch and I've just basically connected it to my tail. That's just sort of going off personal preference and what your natural brow shape looks like. I then start to fill in the brow. So to create a faded look at the front of the brow, I just use a flat edge in my brush and just start to brush whatever products I have left on my brush into the brow. That gives me a faded look on the front. And then I like to fill in my tail so it's dark, so it's nice and dark, and that gives a fuller and more thicker effect. I love concealer, like it is my favourite part, because a brow is not a brow without concealer. Can we agree? Can we agree? I love concealer, like it is the best part of the brow. So I'm using a concealer brush by Royal Nickel and I'm flattening my edge and using a Select Cover Up in the shade NW15, and I'm going to start to carve out my brow. So I'm going to start to carve out the bottom, but personally I wouldn't carve out the top. I just don't like the way it looks, so I tend to stay away from that. But if you have made a mistake and you do want to correct the top, then I suggest using your foundation shade to do so. But at this point, this is when you want to correct any of your mistakes. So if it's smudged, if it's too thick, if it's too big, then you want to start to take this away with concealer. This concealer is thick and pretty much goes over everything. It goes over discoloration, veins, hairs sometimes, depending on how thick or sparse they are. So you can cover anything with this. A few good factors about this concealer is that it's thick, so like I said, it goes over anything. And because it's so pale, it gives you a blank canvas to work on, as opposed to using maybe a concealer that is your skin tone. Then when you start to put coloured eyeshadows on top of that concealer, they're not going to stand out as much, they're not going to be as bright, as bold. So using a light concealer is going to help you achieve this. So that's why I'm using a concealer considerably lighter than my skin, but it also gives you a nice highlighted brow look, so like your brow bone always looks really highlighted and bright, which is also a positive. But I like my dramatic makeup, so this, like, if you wasn't more of a natural person, say, then you might want to go 1 or 2 shades darker with your concealer. I'm now covering the lid with Select Cover Up because this is going to be my base. This is what my eyeshadow is going to stick to. So I want to make sure that it's nice and evenly toned and that all the streaks are gone. So I achieved this by using my brush horizontally. So I sort of use it on its side to help blend out all those streaks and that concealer. So all in one direction, just so that I can blend out all them streaks. If that isn't working for you, you might want to try a tapping motion. This also helps get rid of streaks. If you tap over the area, it sort of evens the tone out and gives you more of an even base. Now you want to buff, just buff, 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 buff to the gods. You don't want it to show through your foundation, so you want to make sure that it's all nice and buffed in before you apply any other makeup. because this concealer is so thick, it can start to show through foundation if it's not of a high coverage. So you just want to make sure that you're just taking the time to buff over them harsh lines. Setting your eyes with a powder at the end is going to make sure that your eyeshadow goes nowhere. Like, your eyeshadow is not moving, it's there for the stay. So you want to make sure that you're powdering it well. To do this, I'm using a NYX high definition powdered foundation in the shade Porcelain, and I'm using a Real Techniques setting brush to apply. You only want a light sweep of product just so that it's not going to mix with your eyeshadows towards the end. Once you've finished priming your eye, you can then move on to eyeshadow. So I'm taking this lovely hot pink shade by MAC, which is in the shade Passionate. I'm taking it on a Kiko fluffy blending brush, and this brush, like, let's just talk about this brush, like how good this brush actually is. Like, the fibres and the bristles on the brush are so soft, like, honestly, it feels like a baby's bum going across my eyes. Like, I'm not even joking. So, like, I definitely recommend this brush. I think it was only like £9, so I definitely suggest getting one of those for your kit. It's like nice, big and fluffy, so I like to use this one for my transition shades, which I'm doing now. So I'm taking that colour into my crease and blending higher. I always suggest starting low and blending high, just because it's hard to correct a mistake where you've blended too high. So you want to make sure you're starting low, and that you can always blend higher. At this point, I would be using big circular movements. This is going to blend your eyeshadow out a lot easier than what small circular movements do. So I'm using big circular movements just to buff out all the eyeshadow that I'm using. To me, the transition shade is like one of the most important shades. You want to get this shade right, just because this is your guidance, this is the eyeshadow you're going to go off for all your other colours. So if this is the wrong shape, then chances are your next colour is going to be the wrong shape also, because you're going to use this first colour as a guide. So you want to make sure that it's the correct shape and that it's blended out properly, because me personally, I wouldn't go back in and try and blend out or buff out the colour before. I always leave it. Once I've moved on, that's it. Like, there is no going back. You just got to cope with it and move on. Build a bridge, get over it. So I'm just blending all that product out. If anyone knows me, like, you'll know how much I'm all for bright, bold colours. I don't like my looks looking pastel or light. I'm all about dramatic, dark, natural and bright. So I like to buff it all in, but I always like to add more product than what's needed. Like, I go overboard. I'm OTT, like, let's get over it, because I just add more and more and more till literally you couldn't even fit any more on my eye. But that's because on pictures it does come across really different to when it does in real life. So I find by adding more eyeshadow, it makes the eye look more photogenic when you try to take a picture. The colours stand out more and they look more like what they do in real life. So I always add more than what I think I should add, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense. So once I've gone off camera and done the other side, and I'm now taking the Urban Decay single eyeshadow, and this is in the shade Relish, which is like a really dark burgundy, red wine sort of colour. Like, I live for these colours. So I'm going to start taking that on a tapered brush, which just means that the ends are sort of shaved off. And this is a NYX brush, and I think it's number 17. So I'm going to start to take that into my crease, but I'm not taking it too far to the inner corner. I'm sort of keeping it on that outer corner just to make a bit more depth in my eye. So I'm just adding more and more and just blending it out slightly. Like, I'm not going to take as much time on this stage as what I did on the first, just because, like I said, I feel like the first stage is the most important, so I don't want to sort of drag it out too long. I feel like this colour really blends nicely into the pink as well. But that's another thing, like, I'm so OCD with colours. Like, I think colours should go together, but if you are picking two colours that don't blend easily into each other, like, say, a yellow and a blue, say if you're choosing them and they don't blend easily, I definitely suggest taking some more time on it. Whereas this red wine colour and the pink, they just blend into each other dead nicely, so it's sort of effortless. You don't really need to go in and do much blending because it just does it for you. So now I'm adding an even deeper shade using the same NYX brush in 17, and this is a MAC blusher in the shade Sketch. I mean, I don't know who would wear that on the cheeks because I wouldn't, but each to their own, I suppose. But I'm just taking that on that brush and just starting with the inner corner and blending it inwards. But I'm keeping it below that red wine burgundy shade. I do want this focus more on my outer corner, just to give my eyes some contour, some depth, and just to add a bit more of a colour to it instead of just having it pinks and reds. This is where the cut crease comes into this part of the tutorial. So taking that concealer brush, making sure that my edges are really thin, and that same concealer from before, the MAC Select Cover Up in NW15. We're going to take that and coat both sides of our brush. Once I've coated both sides of my brush, I can then go in and start to carve out my crease. You want to use your natural crease as a guidance. So I've got like quite a high crease and it's not that deep, so I sort of go along that shape and I often take it slightly above. This is going to stop any creasing or any folding in the eye, so you want to take it slightly higher than your crease. Once I've carved it out, I can then start to fill it in, but one tip I would give you for carving out is always use the shape of your brush to your advantage. So mine has sort of like a semicircle shape at the top, so I always use that to help me carve out like a perfect semicircle. Evenly spread the concealer over the lid because this is going to act as our glue for our pigment, so you want to make sure it's even, otherwise it's going to show through when we use the pigment. I am also slightly blending it on the outer corners just so that it looks more blended and it's not much of a harsh line. So I like to make sure that it's nice and blended so that there's not much work to do when we go to applying the pigment. So now we are ready to apply our pigment, which you want to do while the eye is still wet. So I'm using the Inglot pigment in 82, I believe it is. And we're going to start to use a synthetic brush. This is just an eBay brush. Any cheap flat brush is going to do. Somewhere that's going to get into them corners. And I'm going to start to use patting motions to apply the pigment. Instead of rubbing, you want to pat. This is going to make sure that it stays in place and it's going to make it look more pigmented, as into what rubbing would do. This is one of the most important stages that you don't really want to be missing out. I'm going to be using a Johnston baby wipe just to clean up that under eye area. You don't want to leave it and just carry on anyway as if it's not there, because they're only tiny speckles, but they will pick up in that concealer and it is going to show through the rest of your makeup look. So just thoroughly wiping that area. You can then start to fill in your waterline with your chosen colour. This is Ecstasy by Urban Decay, which is like a metallic blue colour. These do last all night and they are good for people with watery eyes because you don't really need to spend long on each eye. So just tugging down lightly and applying that to my waterline. We're now on to my favourite part of the tutorial, which is adding the lashes. So I am starting with the Duo Glue in Transparent, and these are the Red Cherry lashes in C73. They're nice and long, wispy, and they're not too thick, so they're like pretty ideal for any look that you're wanting to do. So I'm applying that as close to the lash line as I can get it, but me and tweezers do not get along at all. I always put my eye out, so I've thrown tweezers away and we're just starting from scratch with my fingers. So at this point, if you are comfortable with using tweezers, this is when you use them to pop them on, where I'm just using my little short stubby fingers. So you always want to make sure that the cut's to the right length. I find that people often cut them too small or don't cut them enough and they start to poke you and you're in an eye and your eye starts watering, and there's nothing worse. So just make sure they're cut at the suitable length for your eye shape. Once you have stuck your lashes on, then you can now move on to the under eye concealer. So I'm using that same concealer that we use for the under the eyebrows, which is the Select Cover Up by MAC, and this is NW15. And I'm using that same concealer brush just to sweep it under my eye. This will get you right up to that lash line because you want to get right under those lashes, because this is where you're going to be applying your eyeshadow. So once you've applied a thick layer of that, then you want to buff it in with a Dulux crease brush by Real Techniques. I'm just buffing in my edges, and this is going to pick up any more product. So then taking a setting brush by Real Techniques, we're going to set under the eye concealer, and we're going to use the NYX High Definition Powdered Foundation in the shade Porcelain. And we're just going to sweep a little bit under those eyes, just to set the concealer so that it doesn't move, but you don't want too much, otherwise your shadow's going to look really pastel. So you just want to sweep a tiny bit under the eye. Then using a shadow brush by Real Techniques, we're going to take some of that hot pink shade by MAC. It's called Passionate, and we're just going to brush that under the eye. You don't need to be too neat with this because we are going to go over the top and add some more colours and add some depth. So you just want to sweep a little bit under the eye and blend it down. Just making sure it's all blended from corner to corner. Just keeping to the eye shape so that it looks like a rounded eye and it doesn't start to look tapered or winged. So we're adding more products here to make it brighter. Then using a pencil brush by Royal & Langnickel, I'm going to take some of that Relish shade by Urban Decay, and I'm going to start to push that up to my lash line. I'm going to try and get it as high as I can, up to that lash line, right under those lashes, just to make the eye really pop. You don't want to take the shade any further down than that pink, you want it to be a nice transition. So then taking that same brush and that sketch colour by MAC, we're going to start to apply that even closer to that lash line. I don't want too much of this because I do want the eye to be really bright and bold, so we're just going to add a tiny bit right under those lashes. And then we are adding mascara. So I like to add quite a thick coat to my bottom lashes just because I feel like that looks best. So I like to really coat my bottom lashes and make them look really long. I will then start to coat my top lashes. I only put a bit on just so that they stick together and there's no obvious gaps as to where it stops. And then highlighter. So I would usually use matte nylon for this, but I'm going to be using Mako Darling because mine's smashed because of my boyfriend. So I'm going to add that to the inner corners, and I would usually apply it to my brow bone at this point, but I'm not going to because mine is smashed. So I'm just adding it to those inner corners just to make it look really highlighted and make the eyeshadow pop. So now I am on to face, and I am going to start off by doing my concealer. And I sort of do my face backwards. So I start with concealer and then I apply foundation. But you'll see how I do it anyway. So I'm going to take that concealer brush and I'm going to start to place my concealer where I want it. So I'm going to put it in all them highlighting areas. So you want it under both eyes, you want it on your chin, you want it on your cupid's bow and your nose and your forehead. So you want to apply that in the places that you need it. It doesn't need to be neat because we're going to go and buff it in anyway. I'd also put this concealer over any spots or any redness that you have. So I'd always like go over the one big red spot that I always have on my forehead, you know, the one that never goes. So like, I always put it on that one because I always have one or two. So I'll put it over them and then I can buff that in at the same time. And then taking a multitask cheat brush by Real Techniques, I'll start to use a patting motion on that concealer. I find that patting is a better option as to swiping. It sort of acts like a beauty blender but with a brush. Like, I don't really recommend beauty blenders. I mean, I've tried a few of them and I feel like they soak up my products and I just don't like that. It's like you're spending all these money on these dead expensive products and it soaks it up. Like, no. So I use a brush. So I'm just sort of replicating what a beauty blender would do by patting. This is going to stop you from getting streaks as well. You know them horrible streaks that you get? So you just want to pat and it's going to just take that away for you. So I'm using patting motion. Just be careful of your under eye when you're doing this. Like, I've done it, like, you know, when you get a bit carried away and you're patting away, you're poking your eye out, doing this, that and the other, and then you go under where your eyeshadow is. It's just a nightmare. Like, spend all this time doing under eyeshadow and you get concealer on it and there's just like no going back from there, is there? So I just make sure you're taking your time near that area and just patting, using the patting motion. I feel like it gives a more full coverage finish. Like, do you not think? Like, I feel like it just makes me look more full coverage, whereas wiping it, just like wiping all that product away. So I feel like patting is like a better option for me. Get in between those brows. Then I'm going to take my foundation. This is the MAC Studio Fix in NC30. Like, personally, I like my foundation to be a little bit darker than my skin. So I'll always use like maybe a shade darker, nothing drastic. Like, I've not got like a black face and a white body or anything, but I'm going to take a stippling brush by Real Techniques, which is like a kabuki brush, but the fibres on the end are synthetic, so it's not going to soak up your product, which is like really good, because there's nothing worse than putting like all this foundation on and it's like, where's it gone? Because it's all like in your brush, stuck in your brush, making your brush go all horrible. So again, like, I use sort of sweeping motions for this and then I'll pat over it to get rid of them streaks. But like, because you've put that concealer on first, you don't want to put that foundation over your concealer, otherwise it's just completely pointless. You may as well just throw away your brushes and go, because there's no point in putting that foundation over that concealer. So you want to sort of keep out of them highlighted areas. Just make sure you're patting over the line that separates the concealer and the foundation, just so that you've not got any harsh lines. A really important part is that neck. You need to blend that neck. You don't want a slag line. Like, that's like the worst thing you could have in makeup. So God forbid anyone have a slag line. So just make sure you're getting right down your neck. And on the sides of your nose, I feel like a lot of people miss this spot. Like, you have got sides of nose, so just make sure you're getting them and you're covering those, because I tend to get really red on them areas, so just make sure you're covering them. And the forehead, so like, I really struggle, like, because I have really dark hair, I'm always worried that my foundation's going in my hair, and it does sometimes, but you know, just wipe it away with a baby wipe. So carving around my brows, like, I wouldn't personally, when I'm doing my eyebrows, I wouldn't conceal my brows, just because they can look like they're glowing, and like, there's nothing worse to me anyway. So if you are going to conceal the top of your brows, then I would use your foundation shade so that you don't have that problem. So now I'm just picking up any excess product that's on my face, because you don't want clumps of foundation. And I'm using is it a setting brush? Yeah, I think it's a setting brush. A Real Techniques setting brush, and that powdered foundation, which is the NYX High Definition Powdered Foundation, and it's in the shade Porcelain. And I'm just brushing and sweeping that under the eye area. You want this everywhere that you have your highlighted areas. So again, your chin, cupid's bow, nose, forehead, and under your eyes. I like to use powdered foundation because I feel like that gives me that extra coverage. Like, if you're spotty, use the powdered foundation. Like, if you're red, powdered foundation. I use it every day. No matter how good my skin is, I'll just use it just because it makes you look really airbrushed, I feel. But any powdered foundation will do. I just like the NYX ones. I think that they're really, I know it sounds stupid because it's a powder, but they're really creamy. Like, they've got a nice texture. So I like to use them for this. I also use a smaller brush just because it gets in them areas, you know, like on the side of your nose and like sort of in the inner corners of your eyes where you need the powder. I feel like it does a job. It has a, oh my god, it does a good job of getting there. So now I am contouring using a cheek brush by Real Techniques, but I think this one was limited edition. Like, they did a really big set. I don't know if anyone's seen it. It was like massive, and it had about, I think it's like 15 brushes in, and it was like limited edition, and everyone got it on Black Friday. It's meant to be like £100, but it went down to 40, which was like a bargain, and I got it for Christmas, and this is where I got this brush from, and I've heard that it's limited edition, so, but there's alternatives out there. So I'm using the MAC Mineralized Skin Finish in Dark Tan, and I'm just using this to contour and just to buff over my face. Like, personally, I don't like contours that have a real sharp line. Like, that's just not for me. That just doesn't roll with me. So I'm not going to bake or anything. I'm just going to use this brush to buff it all out. Even if even if you've got a small forehead, like I've got a big forehead, I have a meathead, get over it. Even if you do have a small forehead, if you're lucky to have one, I'd still put a little bit of bronzer on there, because the worst thing is having like brown cheeks and a white forehead. So I'd still like even it out by putting a little bit on there. And the sides of your nose, like, I don't feel like my nose needs contouring. Like, if you think different, fair enough, but I don't feel like it needs drastic contouring, so I'll always use just a big brush just to buff over it so it looks even. But if you did have a bigger nose or crooked or bent, then I'd use like a small eyeshadow brush to contour your nose. So I'm using a fan brush, again, eBay brush. I'm guilty as charged, but I'm using the Mako Darling, which is like a nice golden shade. I'm using this to highlight my nose, because like I like having a golden nose. Like, I like when that light hits my nose and it just blinds everyone. So I'm coating that nose on, and I always do it not in between my brows, but in between my eyes, just because like it reflects off the light nicely there. So I always put a little bit there, and my cupid's bow. And then I just dust a little bit on my cheeks. Like, I'm not really a big fan of highlighter on cheeks. Like, I know I'm going a bit overboard here, but for the sake of the video I did. But I'm not a really big fan of highlighter on cheeks, so I only ever dust a little bit on them. I just really focus it on my nose and my cupid's bow. These are like full-on mug shots of me. Like, please ignore it. So now I'm doing lips, and I'm using a concealer brush. It sounds proper daft, but it's a long story. But I lost, over a big like dramatic scene, I've lost my lip brush. So I'm using just this small concealer brush, just anything I could find, and just to apply my lips. I feel like if you had really small lips, like, this brush wouldn't work for you because it is quite big for the job. But I'm using a Royal & Langnickel small concealer brush, and I'm using a NYX. No, it's not NYX. It's Urban Decay Vice lipstick in the shade Uptight, which is like a nice pinky nude. And I'm just going to fill in my lips with this. If you did want to enhance the size of your lips, I definitely suggest using a lip liner, but lip liners just aren't all that for me. Like, I think they're really fiddly and they're hard to use. And I never know what shade to go, so I just like go straight in with that lipstick. So this is a Comfort Matte lipstick, so it's not going to make your lips dry and crusty like that. There's nothing worse. Crusty lips, no thanks. So this is Comfort Matte. It's really velvety and soft, but it looks matte at the same time, so it's like a win-win situation, I think. So I'm like carving out my lips at this point. I'd always overdraw my lips a little, but like have you ever wore red lipstick and like you eat a burger and you've got like red lipstick on your chin? Like no, I can't even cope with it. That's why I've stopped wearing red lipstick, just because I overdry my lips a little bit and then I have red everywhere. So I like to sort of try and keep to my lip shape as much as possible, which I am doing. And always getting them inner corners. Like I feel like people forget, so like make sure you get them inner corners. And then I'd always apply a gloss. I mean, gloss is like my thing right now. Like, I'm loving gloss. I don't know why everyone's so matte. Like, gloss is amazing. Especially if you've got smaller lips, this is going to really emphasise the size of your lips. So this is an Avon Lip Plumper. And it's just like a pearlescent one, which I'm just sticking over that. And it just turns any lipstick glossy. And it's long-lasting, I think. It is a plumper. It does tingle a little bit, but it's more minty than everything. I think it's a really nice gloss for sort of the look that I'm going for. Hope you all like my first tutorial, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel.